affect your choice to have debt or equity? So any ideas, or whatever you want to say, it's fine, no problem. Down, then I think you are taking, it's a very suicidal, it's too risky on your part. You know, there's a thin line between being a brave and stupid. So it's almost a stupidity to invest in the debt of the company. I would say that even investing in the equity of this company is a stupidity, because you may lose basically lots of money. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that opens. All right. Yes, any other point? I could see some hands raised. I'll come back to you. Yes.
On leverage of the leverage ratio, with the leverage ratio is higher, the companies who are down.
So you mean that if the existing debt is already more, then
some companies borrow from the market or something. So the company is on risk, right? So it's also a big factor.
Okay.
Leverage.
Fair enough.
60% maybe for good functions.
No, there is no real ratio. That was the whole idea that we discussed today, that there is no real number. There's no magic number which says that, hey, this is a safe limit, keep it. It's not like temperature that, if the temperature is more than this, then you have the fever, otherwise you're safe. No, this was the whole idea, that it doesn't depend upon any numeric figure. This is a very dynamic thing. And the first dynamic thing we discussed, that the lady said that it depends upon the investor's risk profile. And Gagan, you're Gagan, and you are Rahul. Gagan and Rahul were almost saying that it depends upon the existing situation of the company. Yeah. I want to hear some new point. We already have 2 points. What else can, yeah, oh, sorry.
For me to use equity, the company will be big and introduce on the markets shareholders. And so the company must have a long-term project to convince the shareholders. And all the company cannot use the equity. So debt is a choice, and equity is an option.
For the long-term projects, you mean?
Yes. For me, equity is for a company who has a very long-term project.
Very long-term projects.
Can convince the shareholders.
Yeah.
And they accept to lose a part of their autonomy. The shareholders can be a part of the decision.
That's very important. That's very important, that if the company have a long-term horizon, it has a very, it's not a it's not a project-based company, but the company is going to exist. Company has a long horizon, then you cannot ignore equity. You cannot always live on debt. You must have the equity. And at the same time, you also need to be ready, as gentleman said, that you also keep in mind that equity gives you the voting right. So the shareholders play an active role in the decision making, whereas about the debt holders, we say that we keep them at an arm's length. At arm's length means we keep a fair distance, not because of COVID, but because we don't let them participate in the decision making process of the company. Not that we want it, but it's because we don't want them. They can't, being debt holders. We have a chair here. You can take this. I don't want it. No, because if you were standing, then there's no point. Because if I'm speaking and standing, it's much easier. Or equity. Yep.
I think also there is a limit to debt. So sometimes equity can complete the needs of the company.
Yes. Yeah, debt depends on the limit, and the debt depends on one more thing. That the debt depend is, we use a phrase, I don't know if you hear or not, is called debt covenants. Covenants. Maybe. Is it visible? Can you see it? Debt covenants. The debt covenant is that how much banks are strict when it comes to lending. For instance, you borrow from Nordea Bank, right? And you think that you can also borrow from Danske and Nordea Bank will not come to know about it. Because if you borrow from the second bank, you are putting the stakes of the first bank at risk. Are you not? Think it carefully, because when you are going to repay, it could be possible that you are not having enough money to pay. And by inviting too much of debt, you are inviting too much of risk. And if there was, if the risk was a factor, then Nordea Bank could have refused you in the first instance. So you can't really fox, you can't really cheat, or you can't hide the facts from the bank. So every time you borrow from a different bank, the previous banks, they know it. And it could be possible that when you go to the bank for the first time borrowing, like many people I know, they take mortgage from the bank when they buy the house. Then when you sign the contract, the one piece of information is there that you cannot borrow more, or you cannot borrow from a different resource without the permission of your existing lender, that is a bank. So you have to take the permission from the existing bank so that you can borrow more. The reason is that the existing bank cannot put itself in jeopardy. I mean, it could be very bad, so you can't hide it. So depending upon how liberal the banking environment is, it depends on that. Good point. Any other factor? One important factor which determines whether you go for debt or equity, depending upon the amount, the percentage of your tangible assets. Tangible assets? The plant, building, property, equipment, these all are tangible assets. Intangible assets, copyrights, patents, trademarks, so R&D investment, these are lease rights, these are the intangible assets. Or even your software formula, if you develop. Now imagine that you want to borrow from the bank, you have a meeting with the bank manager, and the manager says, all right, I'm willing to give you loan, but you need to give me some collateral. What is collateral? Collateral is the security you deposit with the bank. And the bank says, what collateral you deposit with me? And you say, you know what, this, you give the bank this thing. Say, this is my security. And the bank read out, there is some x to the power of -9 plus alpha, beta, gamma. And bank says, what is this? What is this? You say, you know what, I'm developing a software. And when this software is developed, I will sell it for 10 million euros. Do you think bank will give you loan? They will really react very. Why? So maybe that guy is right. His formula is really, it can be of millions of euro worth, but what is the value of it? Nothing, unless it matures. You get my point? But if you have the tangible assets, bank is more assured, because in the event of bankruptcy of yours, or in the event of non-payment by you, the bank can use that collateral and can recover. Of course, it will be very inconvenient for the bank itself to sell somebody's property and stuff like that, but still bank is not unprotected. The bank has a kind of financial insurance. The bank is to a certain extent safe. And not all the people who borrow from the bank default. So bank know from their past track record that what percentage of people often make non-payment of the loan or even go to the extent of default. So the covenants can play a very big role when you plan to borrow from the bank. So the amount of the ratio of tangible assets to total assets can have an impact on the borrowing capacity. One last factor I want to discuss with you before we move on to the new topic, next point, is that the companies whose operational cost is low, they are able to borrow more. For example, I don't know whether that you still live, or when I came to Finland as a student, I used to live in this building called KOAS. You still have that? KOAS? Okay. Look at the KOAS. They have a fantastic business model. I mean, if I'm a bank manager and KOAS people come to me to borrow, I would never say them no. You know why? Guess what? Very steady cash flow. Everybody pays at the end of the month. If you don't pay them, they would use their security, and they are very vocal to recover the rent. So consistent cash flow and stable cash flow. And look at their operational cost. One janitor can take care of 2 or 3 areas with one van. That's it. Now imagine if KOAS was not a housing company, but instead it was some insurance company. In the same premises where you people live and pay rent, KOAS would have been paying rent to somebody for the office. And those people, now you people live there and you pay them rent, then they would be paying salaries to the staff of the insurance company. So as instead of net receiver of cash flow, they would have been net payer of cash flow. Do you get my point? So consistent cash flow, significant cash flow, and very low operating cost. And because by nature, historically, Uvascula has always been a student city. And there's no shortage of students coming from all over the places. Many people not only move from the other countries and live in KOAS building, but even in Finland, many people come and study in Uvascula. So there is no problem, there's no demand shortage, at least in the near future. So when KOAS management see for the next 5 years, they don't see a big threat. You get my point? As a bank, I love such kind of clients. And moreover, I forgot to mention, almost 90% of their assets are tangible assets. Buildings, vans, lots of equipment. They don't have any software, by the way. Maybe they have, but what would I do with that? So the point is that the larger chunk of their asset block are tangible assets. What could be a better borrower than KOAS? Housing companies, construction companies, oil companies, airlines, aeronautical companies, they're fantastic borrowers, because of the tangible assets. Software development companies, IT companies, R&D companies, maybe media companies, they are not so good borrowers because they have a huge chunk of their assets absorbed in intangible assets, in the form of intangible assets. All right, all good? So these are different determinants of debt to equity. Sarah, are you doing it already? Yeah. Okay, so we move on finally. The first fundamental question, I think this we answered, that the capital budgeting is very important. We make a long-term plan. We see in this topic, we shall study separately also. But at this juncture, all I can say is that by capital budgeting, we mean that you make a forecast of all the cash flows which you can obtain in the time to come, and then you subtract your cost. And if your net present value, this net value is positive, then the project qualify to be discussed at next stage. But if the sum of expected benefits minus the sum of costs is negative, then that project should be rejected right in the beginning. You don't even, that it doesn't qualify to be considered in the future. Make sense? But as I said, we have a separate discussion. We have a separate topic on capital budgeting in the near future that we shall discuss then more in details. Capital structure, I think we had discussion about it already. What should be the optimum capital structure? There's no real fixed number which make you believe that this 0.7 or 0.6 is the capital structure limit. There's no magic number. It's a very dynamic concept. It keeps changing, depending upon circumstances. The working capital management, which means that, I think this also we discussed, that you should be having enough cash resources available at your disposal so that you are able to meet your day-to-day expenses requirements. You are able to pay for the salaries. You don't have any problem in purchase of raw material. If you need some maintenance expenses, you don't have to wait. So the things go on. And the idea was that at no point the cash inflow go down the cash outflow. All right. So you make sure that always your cash is net positive. And whose job is very important in this case? Usually the big companies have a corporate treasurer. So that person is very important, whose job is to make sure that all the payments, they don't come all together. So imagine that you get all the customers would pay you next week, and all the supplier want cash today, then you will be in trouble, won't you be? Just imagine that all the customers pay you next week or next month, and all the suppliers demand payment today. What would you do? You live dangerously. Okay, so you need to make sure that at no point your net receivables fall short of net payable. And in case there is a possibility, you make arrangement with the bank already so that you can have the current capital from the bank on the favorable terms. Many big companies who are well known, they are already extended this. We use the phrase called CC limit, which means that the bank allows you that, hey, you have at any point of time, let's say you have 100,000 euros limit. This is too big, but anyway, let's say 10,000 euros limit. Okay, so it means that this money you can withdraw from bank anytime, so that you don't have to take any permission. So this CC limit, in many countries, it varies according to situation, but I think this limit is basically designed to ensure that you don't run short of the working capital. It can be very risky proposition. And I think I don't know if I told you or not, I can only talk about the London Stock Exchange because I used to, when I was studying, I was very much into the stock prices in the LSE. In London Stock Exchange, historically, 1% companies every year become bankrupt. And you know the biggest reason? The biggest reason is that they're poor working capital management. About 80% of the companies which become bankrupt every year, they have very handsome looking profits, but they don't have cash because they had the bad treasurers. So the working capital management is very important. At no point of time, your net cash inflow falling short of your cash outflows. If it is possible, then already make some arrangements proactively with your lenders, especially the bankers. This we can discuss, yeah. I don't know whether it's visible to you or not. Can you see it? Okay, so this is the basic model of the firm cash flow. So you can see that we start from the point A. The firm issues securities. When the firm is issuing the securities, what do we call it? In which category it falls? No, that goes to B, but what is this basically? What would you call this action? Sorry? Financing, very good. It's called firm financing. And what would you do with that financing? You start investing in the assets. And the assets are current and fixed. What happens then? When you are using your assets, you are developing the cash flows. Remember, we discussed last week that 3 pictures which I drew, financing, investing, and what comes in the middle? Operations. So then the C thing is very important, because if you are not able to take care of C properly, then your cost of financing would be more, your return on investment would be less, and shareholders would be very angry with you, believe me. Let alone shareholders, you won't have money to pay salaries to your staff. So not so good. And then comes D. The D is government and the other stakeholders. And how come the government comes in between? Yeah, the government comes in between as a mediator, as an anchor, as a moderator. And what is the job of the moderator of the government? It imposes taxes on you, right? With that money, the government is basing its welfare schemes. And if the need be, the government can give you the negative tax. And the negative tax is called subsidies, because then you are getting from the state. The government can give you cash subsidies, or the government can give some tax holidays or some rebates, some exemptions, so that in case you are in the financial hardship, you are able to survive. Did you get my point? But if all goes well, you are generating profits, then the state would impose taxes on you, which we all pay. We are not very happy to pay, but we pay, yeah? What can we do? And actually, the definition of tax is an involuntary payment. So you don't make it voluntary. If the tax is voluntary, how many of you will pay? Tell the truth. If the state says, hey, you have a choice, you pay tax or you don't pay tax. Believe me, I will not hold against you anything. I close my eyes. Let's see who pays or who doesn't pay. How many of you will pay? Tatiana, will you? You're very, kind of philanthropist. You have so much of money and you don't care about it. Okay. So yes. So tax by definition is involuntary payment. But now I'm slightly going off the tangent towards macroeconomics. Taxes are broadly 2 types. The one is called direct tax, and the other is called indirect tax. Direct and indirect. Does anybody know what is direct and what is indirect tax? Any thoughts? Yes, gentlemen. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point, but you're giving me the example, right? What is the philosophy of direct and indirect tax? What is the rationale? What is the thought behind direct and indirect tax? Anybody? I saw one more hand raised. The lady at the back, I guess. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Indirect tax is a tax, like gift tax is the indirect tax.
Gift tax. I never accept anybody's gift. If I have to pay tax, I would return this gift. Say, take your gift away. You want me to pay tax? Not in the wildest of my imagination, I pay tax on the gifts. What is that? What is not transferred?
It is not an income, like the person, it is a compulsory for the person to pay that tax to the government.
Mm-hmm.
It is a direct tax, it is a directly implied on the income level.
Mm-hmm.
And indirect tax, as we say, like VAT, GST,
Mm-hmm.
and on the like.
Which is transferable? Mm-hmm. Which you can transfer and which you can't transfer? Yeah. You're so right. You're so correct. You're so correct. What's your name? Amandeep, you're so correct. Absolutely. That is why I was trying to provoke you say more, because you said it so good. Amandeep has highlighted very important characteristic of tax. What distinguish between direct from indirect? She said that tax which, okay, imagine I'm a tax man, right? My intention is to impose tax on you. You pay me. But then you cannot move this tax to anybody else. I intend the tax to be imposed on you and you have no chance to shift it. As Aman said, no transfer. There's no element of transferability. There's no element of shiftability. Look at the income tax. You earn, you pay, you don't earn, you don't pay. Simple. One more example, wealth tax. When you buy the property and you pay taxes, right? It's your property, you buy property, you pay, you sell property, you pay. You can't ask your neighbors to pay for your house you bought. Why should they pay for it? We also have this, what's the word? What's the word when the generation, when the property passes on to one generation to another generation? Inheritance tax, inheritance tax. So when the property goes from the generation to the next generation, it's an inheritance tax. Come on, it's your parents who gave you the property. Why should somebody else pay tax? And there's also one more tax which comes to my mind. It's not a good word. It's called death duty. I mean, when people die, there is also a tax on the death. Look, tax is so bad that it doesn't leave you even when you die. So there is a tax on dying as well. I know in many countries, including in Finland, people take some insurance. It's called funeral insurance. They already start paying that because many people live alone, and they know that when the last moment comes, then nobody should be having any financial burden. So they already have these funeral directors, companies who they agree with, and they pay some nominal fee, and then in turn, when the person dies, then it's the job of the funeral company to take care of things. But you get my point, yeah? Indirect taxes. The tax on the raw material. If you buy from the country, within the country, it's called VAT. If you buy from abroad, you pay the import duty. Do you? And then there's a tax on the sales. The tax on the production is excise. The tax on the sale is sales, or we call it VAT or GST, whatever you call it. You get my point? This element has a shiftability. The taxman imposed sales tax on you. And what you have done, you added the tax to the price of the commodity and charged from the customer. Here is, as Aman said, here is the element of what? Transferability. Transferability, that separates the direct tax and indirect tax, shiftability, transferability. The tax, the incidence on you and you pay, you can't move it, direct. The incidence is on you, but you are shifting the burden to the other people. It's an indirect tax. Very well said. So this is how the government comes in the picture. And then you are splitting your profits into three parts. Remember, when you have the profits, the profit is trifurcated. The one bit of the profit goes to the taxman. From the remaining profit, you share the profit among your shareholders. And we call it dividends. Dividends, right? And then one part of profit we still keep with us. For what? To reinvest, to plow back, to reinvest in the company. Because there can be some good reasons you need to expand the company in the future, or the bad reason is that you are in rough times, so you can survive. Like we household make some savings, we also save, so keep some money saved. So this is the model, financing model. We move on. And then the different sources of financing we have discussed. The first source of finance that we discussed is equity financing, okay? And then we have the debt financing. But before I go to this further, I want to show you the example. I want to show you the real example where you can see the debt and equity with your own eyes. Do you want to see that? Okay, then let's see it. So if I can quickly. So if, for example, I want to see the BP's annual report. You know what is BP? What is that? British Petroleum. It's not blood pressure. It's British Petroleum, right? So, and here we have the annual report. Yeah. If I click this. Is it visible, Seher, on Zoom? Is it?
Not no.
No.
Page, but not all.
All right. Well, I can share it now.
Yes, no.
So this is British Petroleum, and this report can be a couple of hundreds of pages long, but you don't have to go through all. I straight away take you to the financial statements of this company. Yeah, here we go. And yeah, so I can zoom in a bit. And this is the balance sheet of the company. Can you see that? And have a look at this. How much is the company's equity? Can you see the total equity of the company? Is it visible here somewhere? Can you see this? How much? 90,439. That's it. This company is so cheap. Only 90,000 euros or dollars. What? No, it is. Look at the unit of calculation. It is the. How much is this? It is $1 million. So about $90,000 million. So nearly $90 billion, right? And this could be more than the GDP of many countries. So you can well imagine how big the company is. Okay. So you can see here that the total equity of the company is $90,439 million. But then you see this, there are two figures here. What do they say? So 90,000 is split between 75,000 and something about 15,000. So what is that? So BP's shareholders equity is 75,000 something, and non-controlling interest is something about 15,000. Do you know them? Who are they? They both are together 90,000. 75,000 is BP's equity is about 90,000, right? I don't speak full number. The BP's shareholders interest or the shareholders equity is about 75,000. But then it says non-controlling interest are about 15,000. What are they? What are non-controlling? Who are they? What is this? Remember, I told you last week that among you, some people choose to be the equity holder straight away, but some people are still in a fix. And what word we use for them? Preferred. Have you heard this word? Preferred equity. This 15,000 are those preferred equity who are still not fully equity holder, but they would become at some stage. And why we use the word preferred? Because why were they hesitant to invest in the equity in the first place? Because they were afraid of equity is too risky. And you say, hey, don't like you pamper a child. Hey, don't you worry, don't worry. You don't have to worry about it. You know what? You will be given preference when we start distributing the profits. So what is the advantage of being a preferred investor? That when you are standing in the queue to take dividends from the company, preferred investor would be paid before the other equity investor. So it means these people who are owning this about 15,000 million equity, they would be given dividend first before the common, the ordinary shareholders are given. And what is the amount of common equity or the ordinary equity? It's about 75,000. But then the point is that if you are given such a nice preference, then why would you become a common equity holder? Hey, here's a catch. As a preferred equity investor, you can be first in the queue to get the profit from the company, but you have to give up the voting rights. You have no voting rights. On the other hand, when you are a common equity investor, you may not be first in the queue, but you can change the management by voting against them because you have the voting rights. Make sense? So altogether, if you are a very pure way of thinking, then you would say that no, it's not 90,000. The actual equity of the company is 75,000. Yeah. This is equity. You agree with this? And this was the equity which was in 2019, the equity was this much, 85,000 is always a comparison figure given. Whereas in 2020, BP's equity is 90 something, thousand. Make sense? Okay. And then where is the debt of BP? Where is the BP's debt? Please find out. Equity is very straightforward to get, but you need to do some work to get the debt. But it's here somewhere. Sorry? Liability is debt. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Debt is a liability, yeah, but not every liability is a debt. Do you get my point? Sorry. The non-current liabilities, non-current finance debt, non-current finance debt is your real debt. You see what? Try to understand. Try to understand. If you owe some money to a supplier, that is a liability, but not debt. But if you owe the money to the bank, then it's a debt. Okay. So what we do, we find out the non-current finance debt. And you see here, there are current liabilities and the non-current liabilities. What is the definition of current and non-current in finance? I think we discussed last week. What is called current and what is called non-current? Sometimes we read in economics books, we call it short-term and long-term. Current is short-term and the long-term is non-current. So what is the cutoff point between current and non-current? In finance, your current period is over at the end of 364th day. So if something is maturing before 365 days, it's called current. But if something is maturing on 365th day and onwards, it could be for 10 years, even 20 years, then it's called non-current. Okay. And in finance, you can see that we have the finance debt here. We also have the finance debt here. But for the practical purposes, when you want to calculate how much is BP's debt over its equity, then the debt that we take is called 55,619, which is a finance debt, but in the block of non-current liabilities. Make sense? The current debt is for your working capital management, short-term, pay salaries, pay for the electricity bill, and these kind of things. But with the current debt, you can't make the big investments. It's not possible. The big investments you can only do with the long-term or the non-current debt, finance debt, right? So now here you can see that if I become very Puritan and very, how to say, textbook thinker, then I would say that the debt is about 75,000. No. How much is debt? 55,000. My apologies. So the debt is about 55,000 and the equity is about 75,000. Am I right? Because the other one is a hybrid equity, right? The preferred capital, and look at the word. Even the words you can get a very good guess. Look at the word non-controlling interest. What does it mean? What do you mean by non-controlling? Non-controlling mean you can't vote, you can't control the company. Just come, take your money and leave. And then after some stage, you convert your preferred equity to the ordinary equity. Then you will get the voting rights. Make sense? So there is a logic behind it. So you can see that the finance long-term debt is 55, whereas the equity is 75. Yeah, it's 75. Yeah. So it makes approximately about 0.72. So we can say that BP is 72% equity financed, and what is left? 28% is debt financed. Yeah, so you can say that the ratio of debt to equity of BP is 72 to 28. Sounds good? Is BP, according to you, a good borrower or a bad borrower? In what way? Well, you always have less liabilities because if you have more liabilities, then you are bankrupt. So that is a kind of first yardstick that a company, to be a solvent company, your debt has to be below your equity. Remember, I have discussion about the tangible assets. Is BP a tangible assets based company or intangible? Tangible. Look at the oil rigs they have in the North Sea. If you are in, because I was studying in an oil city in Aberdeen when I was studying in UK in Scotland. It's all oil capital, lots of oil wells, and there is a so many square miles of area in the North Sea taken over by BP. It's like a kingdom of theirs. They have oil rigs. They have trucks, we call them haulage, those big trucks, and their depots and whatnot. So you can see that most of the assets which BP is owning are tangible assets. Of course, they do some research and development. They develop some, but that's a very tiny mini fraction. We can see them actually. Let's see that. If you look at the assets of the company, you can see here that they have a huge chunk of their non-current assets, and out of non-current assets, they have the fixed assets. And it's a massive amount, you can see. And very small fraction, intangible assets, something about $6,000 million. But overall, if you look at total assets, it's about 194, $194,000 million, out of which their intangible assets are very small fraction. But if you look at the balance sheet of Microsoft or Apple or Adobe or some IT companies, the telecom companies like, for example, here in Finland, Sonera or Nokia, you will see a substantial amount of intangible assets. Why so? Because this is their business. This is their bread and butter, to innovate, to grow, to develop new ideas, new softwares, new systems, new processes. All right. But for the BP, I'm not surprised to see that they have a very small fraction of the intangible assets. Questions, comments about this thing you have seen? Any ideas or any thoughts or anything you want to discuss more? No, nothing? Is clear. I think the debt is very clear as well. The thing which I thought I should discuss with you today is venture capital. By the way, is slide visible to you from the back row? Can you see it? Is it visible? Okay. The venture capital is that when the firms are getting financing, the young firms who have no previous track record or very minimalistic track record in the past, they are private company, and then they approach some venture capital companies, and the venture capital, they are providing them some money to work with, which they can utilize. The idea of the venture capital is very simple, that, hey, some people have more brain than the money. At some stage, they got, and this idea is impressing the financer. Do you get my point? You have a great idea, but you don't have money. Especially this wave of venture capital investment came in the 90s, because that was a time when there was an IT boom in the US, and there were hundreds and thousands of companies, they were growing every day basis. And they all were developing great thoughts, great ideas. But the problem was that many of them were still students and unemployed, and many of them have no fixed income. They didn't even have the proper office. And then they were approaching the venture capitalists. And who are the venture capitalists? People with lots of money, big pockets they have, big, deep pockets they have. And what would they do? Like, for example, exactly the same way you see some TV programs. What is the name? Shark Tanks. So there are many more. There's some Indian versions. I think every country has its own, concoctions in this. But you see that this is exactly the idea. That there are people sitting, they're very rich, but they may not essentially know your business very well, the thoughts very well. But then you do the pitching. You try to impress them. They ask you the questions, difficult questions. And if you are able to convince them, then they can provide you the funding. Okay, these venture capitalists can be the individuals or they can be the institutions. Sometimes they are the institution, they are the arms or the branches or the offshoots of some very well-established banks as well. Sometimes even the big pension funds, the big investment funds, equity funds, they also have their, this business operations in the field of venture capitalist. So it's like my money, your brain. So let's combine it and do something great. But the problem is that the venture capitalists, they usually, unless you really impress upon them, they never want to become your first investors. They never want to finance you the first hand. They want to see some performance of yours, some track record, something you have done. Okay, and then based on that track record, they can make some estimates in the light of macroeconomic factors or the business propositions. And then they make this decision to give you money or not to give you money, or how much money, or on what terms they give you the money. Sometimes the terms and conditions are very bad, actually. The venture capitalists, they prefer businesses that have competitive advantage, which is new, which has some unique selling proposition. If you are a very traditional type of thinker, then you will not be expecting anything. If you go to a venture capitalist and they ask you, what will you do? Well, I will start a new mine to dig coal. You won't get anything. Okay? But if you go there with some novel ideas, even some novel process, hey, I will do the same business which others are doing, but differently. And this would be my process. This would be my way. So they think how much value addition you can do. And based on that, they can provide you the funding, yeah? But they will not be the first one who give you the money. They can provide you guidance because they are very seasoned people. They have so many years of experience they carry along, but sometimes this experience makes them sometimes the experience is not so good. Because when you are experienced in certain way, then your mind can never get the fresh air. You are thinking in some contrived way. Your mindset is in certain directions. So you may not. No creativity. So the lack of creativity. So you need to open the ventilator, like we have opened the ventilator to get the fresh air. But it's very difficult for many people who have experience of many years they think in a certain way, their mindset is very rigid. And this is why they become a bit impatient with those young innovators. Do you get my point? And as a result, they start interfering too much in the idea. And they interfere so much in the idea, the risk is that the idea would lose its novelty. I always think about the business of filmmaking. In India, in many institutes, in many countries, there's so many graduates coming from the film or the drama institute. They have so much great ideas, but they don't have money. Then they approach some financiers. They say, no, have some item song, have, don't have this art movie actor. Sir, you know some names? Okay. Have Katrina Kaif, not this one, that one. So what happens in the process? The whole idea, the whole thoughts are lost. So either those young and entrepreneur filmmaker, they either leave the project, they no, it's not, I would rather do something else. Or if they agree to the demands of those people who are financing them, then the whole idea is so in a very bad form. Yeah. Another form, which is more benevolent, which is more humane, is called the angel investors. Look at the word, the prefix angel. So they are less, they have a lot of things common with a venture capitalist, but they are far more softer and benevolent, right? So these are often, how to say, there are some funds or some scholarships which are meant to promote some business ideas. Like in many countries, when I came to Finland as my PhD student, to some extent, I was getting some funding from a university, but I was told that, hey, you need to prove that your PhD is really effective, useful. And these are some angel investors. We call them some, we call them as some research bodies which finance you. But the good thing is that they're not very interventionist. If they like the idea, they give you money, but they keep the mouth shut. They would never interfere. So I can take the same example, not exactly in the business world, but in the academic world. The angel investors give you finances, given upon the fact that you impress upon them, they like the idea, but the good thing is that they are far more humane than the venture capitalist, and they let you work independently and freely. And believe me, all my 3 years, they didn't even ask me anything. So they were so kind. In fact, I was the one who would inform them, who would tell them that, hey, this is how things have progressed, but they would never ask me anything. So the bottom line is that the angels are here around somewhere. You have to find them. And then the last point, we have discussed the debt financing. Yeah, debt financing is that all good. You need to keep an arm's length distance between the company and the investors. And of course, we have some other categories also. We call them as the friends, relatives, and the fools. So we say that, hey, friends, families, and fool. So we can borrow from them as well. They can be useful, but don't try to fool people. You can fool some people sometime, but not all the people all the time. So yeah, that was only sarcastic. That's why I put some smiley here. Yeah. So yeah. So these are different forms of financing which you can get. And this example of financing structure of British Petroleum, I have given to you already, shown it to you, but now I have a homework for you. You know what, I can finish? Okay. So we have some homework, and the idea is that you will not leave soon. You will do this homework right now, and me, Sahar, and Tatiana will be moving, and we'll try to help